Hey, Cena Semiotics, what's up? You witnessed a murder last week. Not sure why I'm mentioning it, but Nietzsche kinda fits. Yeah, that sort of thing can start making you question your morals. Like, what is going on in this world? So, what I thought I was gonna do is, maybe go read some of these aphorisms in this book because, all the other stuff I read is so long, and I think it makes it hard for it to work on Twitch. So I'm gonna see how this goes. I've done this before. I don't know if you were around last time I read aphorisms. I did some by Kafka actually, but yeah. So I'm gonna go through some of this. So we'll see how it goes. To get past all this, all right. Nietzsche's preface on the prejudices of philosophers, page 7. So I have to get down there. All right. But other than that, I mean, are you doing okay? Like, other than seeing people get murdered, which is a little odd. When I was a kid, I'm in New York, and they took us to the Intrepid Museum, which is this battleship. This is an old battleship that is decommissioned from World War II, and they've got like a lot of cool stuff on it. Francois de Roquefort is aphoristical. Yeah, I have to go find more. So, yeah, that'd be a good place to also go look, like for who has aphorisms, because I think it might work better in the Twitch format. So yeah, there's a lot more to the story, but let's just say I mistook the shooter for a helpful bystander. From there, I was only lucky. Oh wow, yeah, that's a little yeah, that's lucky. That's the sort of thing. It's like dangerous situations, and it's just rather it can go sideways fast. Yeah. So to finish up my dumb story is, well, I must have been like a little kid, and they took us on this thing, and everything's like, yeah, let's look at all the nice stuff, and then everyone's like looking over the side of the boat, and it's a big ship. You're like a few stories up on the ship, and like they're fishing a dead body out of the water. Somebody had like shot. We all have the strength to bear the suffering of others. Uh, I offered to call the police. Yeah, that's not maybe not what the person wanted to hear. So, yeah. It's like, I'm sorry, I won't call the police in that case. Yeah. Oh, man. Yeah. This is the dumb things that, Are we gonna read the preface? I don't know if the preface is any good. Let's just, maybe I'll look at this. How long is this preface? Offer to call the police. Alright, and then we're gonna jump right into it. Contents. Alright, so let's read the preface. It's only 2 pages and see how it goes. Yeah, well, I'm happy you're here, Cena Semiotics. It sounds overly exciting. Many of these overly exciting things make for good stories, but they are not so much fun in the moment. Oh, good. We're gonna start off with some. Yeah, yeah. I remember very clearly a stand-up guy was like, he was getting mugged. A guy pulled a gun on him, and he's like, "Give me your keys." And he's so shocked, he goes, "My keys?" And the guy goes, "Yes, your keys." He goes, "Mikey? Who's Mikey? Who's Mikey?" I was like, "I don't know who. How could I give you Mikey?" And it was like the guy's like, "No, your keys." He's like, "No, my keys." "What do you mean my keys?" "Your keys." And eventually the carjacker got so confused that he ran off. So it's like, yeah, somebody pulled a gun and it made a great stand-up routine. So, good old Nietzsche. We're going to start off with misogynism in the fourth word of this book. Anyway, how are my levels anyway? I can't quite tell at the moment. I had to futz with them because I wanted to play different music, and so I hope my levels are okay. So, yeah. And so I tried to and so a guy shot someone else, and I tried to call the cops. All right. Let's go with the Nietzsche, beyond good and evil here. Supposing truth is a woman, what then? Are there not grounds for the suspicion that all philosophers, insofar as they were dogmatists, have been very inexpert about women? I mean, is this something you're speaking of from Experience here, Nietzsche? Not very good with women? Because you're a philosopher at this point if you're writing about philosophers. So, that the gruesome seriousness, the clumsy obtrusiveness with which they have usually approached truth so far, have been awkward and very improper methods for winning a woman's heart. Yeah, apparently Nietzsche didn't have any friends, wasn't very well liked by women either, so I guess he would know about being awkward. Actually, I don't think he was awkward, I just don't think he got along with anyone. Anyway, what is certain is that she has not allowed herself to be won, and today every kind of dogmatism is left standing, dispirited and discouraged, if it is left standing at all. For there are scoffers who claim that it has fallen, that all dogmatism lies on the ground, even more that all dogmatism is dying. You know, this is the other thing. You talk about what you know a lot of times, and so we're over here, and he's talking about dogmatism. It's like, maybe you're dogmatic, Nietzsche. Yeah. Oh yeah. Anyway, because this is not my normal stuff, or even in my normal stuff, feel free to ask questions. Just let me know, because I'm gonna try to have some more fun with this. Well, I mean, the tie is in the concept of good and evil, and there are complexities in what I just described. Yeah, there are. These things get complicated quick, because you're like, I don't want to die. What do I have to do not to die? It's like, I don't even want to get hurt, for that matter. Die, let alone die. Yeah. Yeah. Well, try not to die, usually. Alright, speaking seriously, there are good reasons why all philosophical dogmatizing, however solemn and definitive its airs used to be, may nevertheless have been no more than a noble childishness and tyrannism. The new coming metamorality, the Ubermensch, yes, from the new coming metamorality from a century ago. And perhaps the time is at hand when it will be comprehended again, and how little used to be sufficient to furnish the cornerstone for such sublime and unconditional philosophers' edifices as the dogmatists have built so far. Any old popular superstition from time immemorial, like the soul superstition, which, in the form of the subject, the ego superstition, has not even yet ceased to do mischief. You know what's funny about this? I think like this right here, this like subject and ego claim here, I mean, this would have been like directly from Freud, from like a few years earlier, that there is the concept of subject and ego is like a very contemporary thing. It's not like a, I mean, like this concept is like contemporary to him. It's not like even yet ceased to do mischief. It just barely got around on the stage. Some play on words, perhaps a seduction by grammar, or an audacious generalization of very narrow, very personal, very human, all too human facts. The dogmatist philosophy was, let us hope, only a promise across millennia. I think they did know each other. In fact, there was something like they maybe even talked at some point. I think Nietzsche's sister may have gone to see Freud for something. Like she may have gone to him for treatment or something. There is I don't remember exactly, but I'm pretty sure there was some connection there. The dogmatist philosophy was, let us hope, only a promise across millennia, as astrology was in still earlier times when perhaps more work, money, acuteness, and patience were lavished in its service than for any real science so far. To astrology and its supra-terrestrial claims we owe the grand style of architecture in Asia and Egypt. Yeah, she was evil. It seems that all great things first have to bestride the earth in monstrous and frightening masks in order to inscribe themselves in the hearts of humanity with eternal demands. Dogmatic philosophy was such a mask, for example, the Vedanta doctrine in Asia and Platonism in Europe. Alright, so now we're finally getting somewhere. He's starting to criticize everyone else. Also this stuff, I hate when people beat up on astrology. Astrology just was the science of the day. Like, that was the science. It wasn't like that was like people making crap up. That was what they called science. And so, like, accusing the old science of being bad and stupid, like accusing astrology of being bad and stupid, was just accusing the science. And people made up new names because they wanted to distinguish themselves, but that's just the old science. So it's like, that's not actually fair to the people back from a few hundred years ago. Let us not be ungrateful to it, although it must be conceded that the worst, most durable, and most dangerous of all errors so far was a dogmatist error, namely Plato's invention of the pure spirit and the good as such. But now that it is overcome, now that Europe is breathing freely again after this nightmare, at least can enjoy a healthier sleep. We, whose task is wakefulness itself, are the heirs of all that strength which has been fostered by the fight against this error. To be sure, it meant... Well, I'm happy you're happy. I don't know. I wonder what I said, or what he said. To be sure, it meant standing truth on her head. Alchemy is the womb of chemistry. Oh yeah, that's right. To be sure, it meant standing truth on her head and denying perspective, the basic condition of all life when one spoke of spirit, and how the good as Plato did. Indeed, as a physician one might ask, how could the most beautiful growth of antiquity, Plato, contract such a disease? Did the wicked Socrates corrupt him after all? Could Socrates have been the corrupter of youth after all? And did he deserve his hemlock? Yeah, maybe. But the fight against Plato, or to speak more clearly and for the people, the fight against Christian ecclesiastical pressure of millennia, for Christianity is Platonism for the people, has created in Europe a magnificent tension of the spirit, the like of which has never yet existed on earth. With so tense a bow, we can now shoot for the most distant goals. I almost said gods there, which would have been interesting too, but he said goals. To be sure, European man experiences this tension as need and distress. Twice already attempts have been made in the grand style to unbend the bow. Once by means of Jesuitism, the second time by means of the democratic enlightenment which, with the aid of freedom of the press and newspaper reading, might indeed bring it about that the spirit would no longer experience itself so easily as a need. The Germans have invented gunpowder, all due respect for that, but then they made up for that. They invented the press. Pretty sure the Germans got it from the Chinese, but okay. Anyway, but we who are neither Jesuits, nor Democrats, nor even German enough, we good Europeans and free, very free spirits, we still feel it, the whole need of the spirit and the whole tension of its bow. And perhaps also the arrow, the task, and who knows, the goal. Okay, and that was 1885. Yeah. Okay. So let's go find out what On the Prejudices of Philosophers are. And yeah, like I said, anyone out there watching, please feel free to... So this table comes in the original, but not in the later standard edition. It's interesting. Part 1. Let's see, I just want to take a look. Okay, yeah, so we've got these short sections. So jump in any time, because I'm going to read a short section and then maybe discuss. The will to truth, which will still tempt us to many a venture, that famous truthfulness of which all philosophers so far have spoken with respect. What questions has this will to truth not laid before us? Alright, so we're already getting this sort of famous locution of his, the will to something. Like will to power, will to truth. It's already starting right here. Laid before us. What strange, wicked, questionable questions. That is a long story even now, and yet it seems as if it had scarcely begun. Is it any wonder that we should finally become suspicious, lose patience, and turn away impatiently? That we should finally learn from this Sphinx to ask questions too? Who is it really that puts questions to us here? What in us really wants truth? Okay, so... yeah, like, I guess if you're talking, if we actually don't know what truth is, let's, like, for a second be like, I don't know what the truth is. I'm not broadcasting on Twitch right now. That might not be true. That's false. That's not true. Well, who are you at that point to ask such a question? Like, who is it that gets to ask the truth? Like, as a person broadcasting on Twitch, do I get to deny that, like, this is being broadcast out? I don't know. And what really what am I doing when I'm asking that sort of question? Like, I already know the answer about, like, am I broadcasting on Twitch? Well, Stream Manager says I'm broadcasting on Twitch. It's like, okay. But what does that even mean then? So, what are we asking? All right. Indeed, we came to a long halt at the question about the cause of this will, until we finally came to a complete stop before a still more basic question. We asked about the value of this will. Suppose we want truth, why not rather untruth and uncertainty and even ignorance? Okay, so like maybe it's better just not to know if I'm streaming on Twitch or just do stuff randomly. The problem of the value of truth came before us, or was it we who came before the problem? Who of us is Oedipus here? Who the Sphinx? It is a rendezvous, it seems, of questions and question marks. And though it scarcely seems credible, it finally almost seems to us as if the problem had never even been to put so far, as we were the first to see it, fix it with our eyes, and risk it. For it does involve a risk, and perhaps there is none that is greater. Alright, so we got this first little mini section here. And so what do we got going on? It's a who gets to ask what sorts of questions. We've got a basically we're asking the sort of somewhat philosophically inappropriate thing. Who are you? Are you allowed to ask a question? Because most of the time people, you're allowed to ask philosophical questions, but this is sort of questioning, is there a problem with the person? Yeah. He is the meta, basically. I don't know if he grasps the meta, he's sort of defining the meta here. He wants to get outside the system. He's trying to, I think, climb outside, and the whole 20th century was a sort of a reaction to this. Okay, so it's we've got this other thing. It's if we are asking the question, who are we asking it of? Are we asking the question of ourselves? Are we the questioner, or are we the answer? That's what's coming here too. So he's trying to already switch around the order of things here. It's not just us who are asking, it's us that also have to ask and answer. Yeah, it's not just us who are asking, it's us who also have to answer. And so who is the questioner here? Who is the Sphinx? And it's a rendezvous of questions and question marks and questions answered, perhaps, or maybe not even answers. Okay. And then it's has never even been put so far. And now he's just being grandiose, that we're gonna risk asking these hard questions. Would you say he succeeded in climbing out? No, I don't think he did. And I think he actually understood that he didn't. He in my final analysis of Nietzsche, he always grappled with grammar as something he couldn't escape, and that was a lot of the 20th century people trying to figure that out. Grammar. He couldn't escape his own language. He liked it too much, and that was basically I don't think he ever got out. I mean, I don't think he quite appreciated the power of linguistics and other sciences, because he was always trying to do this ethical thing. So no, I don't think he got out. Nope. It gets a little, of course everything's more complicated. Alright, let's see, this is 2. Let's see, we got a page here. Yeah, okay, so we got a page. This is kind of good. Alright. How could anything originate out of its opposite? I mean, come on, you read your Hegel. That's the whole thing in Hegel. Never noticed that, but it's been a crash course. Good to know. Wow. Thoughts of Wittgenstein. Yeah, well, I mean, they were all Germans. Or Wittgenstein wasn't a German, of course. He was Austrian. But, they were all reading in German. This is in the air. So. And also Heidegger, for that matter, too. I mean, Heidegger explicitly gave Nietzsche lectures where he was discussing stuff. So Heidegger was the philosopher of the being thrown into something. You never get out. He was how do you get thrown into something? You do not escape it. You were thrown into the world in Heidegger. So, that's a different way of dealing with the problem. It's the thrownness of being thrown into a world, and as opposed to Nietzsche trying to climb out and get on top. Imagine that, yeah. How could anything originate out of its opposite? For example, truth out of error, or the will to truth out of the will to deception, or selfless deeds out of selfishness. What do you say with man to such a mustache? Nice mustache is what I say. Or the pure and sunlight gaze of the sage out of lust. Such origins are impossible. Whoever dreams them is a fool, indeed worse. The things of highest value must have another peculiar origin. They cannot be derived from this transitory, seductive, deceptive, paltry world, from this turmoil of delusion and lust. Rather, from the lap of being, the intransitory, the hidden God, the thing in itself, there must be their basis and nowhere else. Alright, so See, here we go. We already got being, so hello Heidegger. The lap of being, the intransitory, the hidden God. I mean, then here we've got Immanuel Kant. So, big old like Kant thing right here. I don't know, but you see, this is where I guess Heidegger jumps in. He would go with the being seduced, like the more modern, contemporary European philosophy. You're being seduced by the world. You're thrown into the world. You're into this turmoil of the world. So that's where Heidegger, I think, comes in. And then this is the Kantian strain, the thing in itself. There must be their basis and nowhere else. Hidden God. So this way of judging constitutes the typical prejudgment and prejudice which give away the metaphysicians of all ages. This kind of evaluation looms in the background of all their logical procedures. Yeah, I think now he's railing on Kant. It is on account of this faith that they trouble themselves about knowledge, about something that is finally baptized solemnly as the truth. The fundamental faith of the metaphysicians is the faith in opposite values. It has not even occurred to the most cautious among them that one might have a doubt right here at the threshold where it was surely most necessary, even if they vowed themselves de omnibus dubitandum. I wish I knew what the Latin was. Let's see, does it say? The Nietzsche's attack on the faith is prefigured in the title of his book. The aphorism invites a comparison with the first aphorism of human all too human. Alright, so, oh no, it's all is to be doubted. It's from Descartes. Okay, de omnis dubitandum does doubt everything. Yeah. You say, well, you doubt that mustache, is what you say. For one may doubt, first, whether there are any opposites at all, and secondly, whether these popular valuations and opposite values on which the metaphysicians put their seal are not perhaps merely foreground estimates, only provisional perspectives, perhaps even from some nook, perhaps from below, frog perspectives, as it were, to borrow an expression painters use. For all the value that the true, the truthful, and the selfless may deserve, it would still be possible that a higher and more fundamental value for life might have to be ascribed to deception, selfishness, and lust. It might even be possible that what constitutes the value of these good and revered things is precisely that which they are insidiously related, tied to, and involved with these wicked, seemingly opposite things. Maybe one with them in essence. Maybe. Yeah, there's a very big maybe here. But who has the will to concern himself with such dangerous maybes? For that, one really has to wait for the advent of a new species of philosophers, such as somehow another, and converse taste and propensity from those we have known so far. Philosophers of the dangerous maybe in every sense. And in all seriousness, I see new philosophers coming up. You know, come on, man. He was talking about himself. He was like, I'm the dangerous, I'm new. He's like the king of hipsters. That's what you say to a man with such a mustache. That is the king of hipsters' mustache. Okay. Let's see how long 3 is. Oh, look at that. 2 paragraphs. And yeah, anyone out there, feel free to ask a question or jump on in. However, after having looked, see what's weird though, that this is all Darwinian, but they didn't read each other. That's not true. Well, no. Nietzsche did read Darwin eventually. He hated evolution. Nietzsche hated evolution, I think. He basically was like, this is like the stupidest thing I've ever read in my entire life. At least that's what I was told at some point. That Nietzsche basically commented that like Darwinian theory is like terrible. My suspicion was that Nietzsche, he saw it as competition. After having looked long enough between the philosopher's lines and fingers, I say to myself, that's what I was told, synestemiotics, I don't remember exactly why, but that's what I remember. I say, I'm not a Nietzsche scholar. I can't speak definitively on these things. I say to myself, by far the greatest part of conscious thinking must still be included among instinctive activities, and that goes even for philosophical thinking. We have to relearn here, as one has to relearn about heredity and what is innate. Yeah, so maybe, like, he may have actually right here. Who knows? As the act of birth deserves no consideration in the whole process and procedure of heredity, so being conscious is not in any decisive sense the opposite of what is instinctive. Most of the conscious thinking of a philosopher is secretly guided and forced into a certain channels by his instincts. Excuse me. Behind all logic and its seeming sovereignty of movement, too, there stand valuations or more clearly physiological demands for the preservation of a certain type of life. For example, that the definite should be worth more than the indefinite, and mere appearance worth less than truth. Such estimates might be, in spite of their regulative importance for us, nevertheless mere foreground estimates, a certain kind of nécessité which may be necessary for the preservation of just such beings as we are, supposing that is, that not just man is the measure of things. Nietzsche kind of wanted to make it an intelligent universe, so like intelligent design. Thus spake Zarathustra is about inspiring that Nietzscheism as an innate religion temple, and then of course Hitler. Yeah, so I'm not so surprised actually that may have been the thing, that he had a different conception of how people should be, in that, like, putting us along with all the with the animals probably was like against what he kind of wanted to do here in terms of like getting outside of the system. The other thing was, I think Darwin made kind of a splash, like in the book, so like the whatever, the I'm blanking on the name of the book, the evolution, the theory of natural selection, or whatever it is, by the process of I'm blanking on the book. It was a bestseller, so like I'm pretty sure that by this point Nietzsche would have at least there's just water. By this point Nietzsche would have at least heard of it because it was such a popular book. So yeah, water. Quite often it's beer or scotch, but not today. Just some water. Alright, so he's basically, in this stuff, is like saying, even our best, like, theories, all logic. So, just all logic. It's not like technical logic or all logic. And it's seeming sovereignty of movement. So, all the things comes down to the physiological things that preserve us, our kind of life. So, it's some sort of it all is based somehow in instinct. Let's see. Okay, 4. The falseness of a judgment is for us not necessarily an objection to a judgment. In this respect, our new language may sound strangest. The question is to what extent it is life-promoting, life-preserving, species-preserving, perhaps even species-cultivating. Alright, so again, it's not truth that we're aiming at, but we're some sort of higher other thing. And we are fundamentally inclined to claim that the falsest judgments, which include the synthetic judgments a priori, are the most indispensable for us, that without accepting the fictions of logic, without measuring reality against the purely invented world of the unconditional and self-identical, without a constant falsification of the world by means of numbers, man could not live. That renouncing false judgments would mean renouncing life and a denial of life. To recognize untruth as a condition of life, that certainly means resisting accustomed value feelings in a dangerous way, and a philosophy that risks this would by that token alone place itself beyond good and evil. Okay, so basically you're putting life separate from good and evil here. So this is the crux of the matter, I guess. So beyond good and evil, and what is beyond good and evil? A philosophy that goes so far as to put something on the, like, beyond good, bad, and evil. It puts a life out there or whatever, and things that point at that thing, that life thing, preserving of the self or some sort of species or something, life promoting, life preserving, species preserving, even species cultivating. That is beyond good and evil. Why this should be outside of good and evil, that you could put something outside there, is I mean, why not, I guess. I mean, why should there be good and evil be all encompassing? I don't know. But that life should be out there. I mean, perhaps Nietzsche is right, but this is not an argument for that. This is just saying that you can do it, I guess. Sort of like a declaration that life does not listen to whatever good and evil has to be. What provokes one to look at all philosophers half suspiciously, half mockingly, is not that one discovers again and again how innocent they are, how often and how easily they make mistakes and go astray. In short, their childishness and childlikeness, but that they are not honest enough in their work, although they all make a lot of virtuous noise when the problem of truthfulness is touched even remotely. They all pose as if they had discovered and reached their real opinions through the self-development of a cold, pure, divinely unconcerned dialectic. Yeah, think of the actions of the collections. Take country, for example. Okay, sure, like they think like this is what our nation's gonna do, so this sort of nationalistic view of things. They don't think of it as like subject to good and evil. It's just like the country has to just like go. Fair? Divinely unconcerned dialectic, as opposed to the mystics of every rank who are more honest and doltish and talk of inspiration. While at bottom it is an assumption, a hunch, and indeed a kind of inspiration, most often a desire of the heart that has been filtered and made abstract, that they defend with reasons they have sought after the fact. They are all advocates who resent that name, and for the most part even wily spokesmen for their prejudices which they baptize truths, and very far from having the courage of the conscience that admits this, precisely this, to itself, very far from having the good taste of the courage which also lets this be known, whether to warn an enemy or friend, or from exuberance to mock itself. Semiotic says it does stuff, but it isn't really a person, so it doesn't have the same kind of agency if they have it at all. So a country's ideology cannot follow the moral code that really applies to humans. The evidence is the phrase America lives. Yeah, to be fair, like, yeah, once you start getting into groups, like countries, corporations, any sort of like tribes, whatever, it doesn't, the moral, like the very individualistic moral code that we have here in the West, at least, stops applying. I don't know about other places. I think maybe the Chinese philosophy does things differently over there. But yeah, that's true. But I don't know why you can't just then expand good and evil to group. No American lives. Yeah. No American lives. Yeah, there aren't any of those either. But yeah, what was I saying? Yeah, I don't know why you couldn't expand a moral code to countries. Lives of American people are privileged, but it doesn't line up with our human moral code. Oh, sure. I mean, everyone like this country, America here, I mean, they privilege it. Like, they privilege an American life over everyone else's life. And I mean, other countries do that too. So usually that does not line up with moral law. Because then you... But what's it called? Like citizenship gives you certain rights in that country, and that sort of tramples human rights quite often. So yeah. So this is, I guess, it may be, but I don't see them talking about any like groups of people. They talk about philosophers, but I take it like this is all directed at individual philosophers. It's not just like the group of philosophers, like the nation state of philosophers. So I mean, it could be, but yeah. See, it's they all pose if they had discovered their and reached their real opinions through some sort of cold, pure, divinely unconcerned dialectic. Like they got it through their logic, but Nietzsche is saying no, they got it through their childish impulses. Nah. Feel free to ask. It doesn't matter. Like, I'm not... There's no reason why I'm getting this right either. It may be what's in the background here. I mean, the note here is one of Kant's central questions. I mean, it does look like Nietzsche is also criticizing some of the philosophers. You let me do my show. I'm wrong plenty, so that's okay. You can ask. You might be right. I mean, it's no fun if I'm the only one like asking questions here, and I'm sitting here talking to myself for like 2 hours, which is, I guess, not that bad. But it's better if other people join in. Okay, continuing. The equally stiff and decorous tartuffery of the old Kant as he lures us on in the dialectical bypaths that lead to his categorical imperative really lead astray and seduce. This spectacle makes us smile as we are fastidious and find it quite amusing to watch closely the subtle tricks of old moralists and preachers of morals, or consider the hocus pocus of mathematical form with which Spinoza clad his philosophy, really the love of his wisdom, to render that word fairly and squarely, in mail and mass, to strike terror at the most outset into the heart of any assailant who should dare to glance at that invincible maiden and Pallas Athena. How much personal timidity and vulnerability this masquerade of a sick hermit betrays. Yeah, you're just the asshole undergrad who won't yield the floor? Nah, it don't matter. Well, I mean, that's fine, but like, I don't care. Like, you don't have to yield the floor. I don't have to read your comment either. Like, if the chat, sometimes the chat does move actually kind of quick. It's like, I don't read all the comments. I let the people discuss among themselves. That's fine too. So this is kind of funny. Again, now we're definitely getting into the hate on Kant, bit of Nietzsche, and also this might be the other part of it, that we've got the sick hermit down here. It's that the sitting on your butt by yourself and reasoning to yourself is not necessarily the way to do it. Oh, I know. I'm like, there's at least a 4-second delay on all the Twitch streams, so it's not usually at least 5. So this is a question, like, who is Nietzsche arguing with? He's calling these people sick hermits, the philosophers that are sitting around reasoning and trying to get these things done. I mean, again, I'd have to say that Nietzsche is sort of criticizing himself here. I don't recall Nietzsche being a man of the people, heading out into like doing good in the world and like being among the folks. So, oh yeah, and to be fair, like the chat I have here, this is just a pop-out box of the Twitch chat. So when you write it, I'm probably getting it as fast as the chat goes. So, even if it doesn't show up on video. Yeah. So this is kind of, his father was a minister. Yeah. I mean, so was Heidegger's dad. So I wouldn't be, yeah. So maybe he knows what he's talking about here. But I don't know if Nietzsche was really any like more popular. Yeah. Christian ideology. Yeah. Well, you have to write on what you know. So a lot of Christians take their ideology seriously. Gradually, it has become clear to me that what every great philosophy so far has been, namely the personal confession of its author and a kind of involuntary and unconscious memoir. Also that the moral or immoral intentions of every philosophy constituted the real germ of life from which the whole plant had grown. I mean, too seriously for religion is what to do. Yeah, too seriously to be satisfied. You know, people take it different ways, so it clearly did not work for Nietzsche. Every great philosopher has been the personal confession of its author. So yeah, he's really criticizing it as this is too individualistic and they haven't escaped their own problems in some sense. So I mean, this is why I don't think, like, this does seem a very personally directed thing. You know, there's always the old criticism of people like saying, oh, you're attacking the person. It's an ad hominem attack. And I don't always think that's I don't always agree that ad hominem attacks are the wrong thing to do. Sometimes it is the right thing to do to attack a person because they might not know what they're talking about, and it doesn't make sense that they, even if they get it right, it's not worth listening to them. Like it's like looking at a broken clock. It's right twice a day, but like you don't look at it. You don't look at it because it is broken all the time. Even if it's right twice a day, it's not worth looking at. And so it's like he's sort of yelling at the philosophers here saying, look, you're just picking out these little itsy teeny little problems of the world because they're your personal problems. Now you might hit on something, I guess, but like it's in every philosophy concept the real germ of life from which the whole planet is grown. So it's like these sort of these personal conventions might have a germ of life, but like he's saying they're very small. Indeed, if one would explain how the abstruseness metaphysical claims of a philosopher really came about, it is always well and wise to ask first, at what morality does he aim? Accordingly, I do not believe that a drive to knowledge is the father of philosophy, but rather that another drive has, here as elsewhere, employed understanding and misunderstanding as a mere instrument. But anyone who considers the basic drives of man to see what extent they may have been at play just here as inspiring spirits or demons and kobolds will find that all of them have done philosophy at some time, and that every single one of them would like only too well to represent just itself as the ultimate purpose of existence and the legitimate master of all other drives. For every drive wants to be master, and it attempts to philosophize in that spirit. Okay, so it's like, yeah, why are they bothering to do this? And it's like, well, is there a drive to knowledge? Or I didn't pop up whatever that last little bit was there. I wonder if you could say that philosophy instantiated itself. Well, questioning instantiated itself. So people were asking questions a long time ago. So again, is he just tipping his hand? At what morality does he aim? Like, what's the question of this then? What is the ultimate point? What work is the term morality doing right here? I don't know that the word morality in this question actually does any work. It's just at what does all this aim? And is it a morality? Is it a knowledge? Is it something else? Some sort of understanding. Now, Nietzsche is accusing all the philosophers of making themselves like the legitimate person. Like he's trying to justify themselves to make themselves on top. Every drive wants to be master and attempts to philosophize in that spirit. So everything that the person's saying, that one wants to make itself the most important. To be sure, among scholars who are really scientific men, things may be different, better if you like. There you may really find something like a drive for knowledge, some small independent clockwork that, once well wound, works on vigorously without any essential participation from all the other drives of the scholar. The real interests of the scholar therefore lie usually somewhere else, say in his family, or in making money, or in politics. He gets to that in the genealogy of morals, probably. I haven't read that in a long time. The real interest of the scholar lies somewhere else, family, money, politics. Indeed, it is almost a matter of total indifference whether his little machine is placed at this or that spot in science, and whether the promising young worker turns himself into a good philologist or an expert on fungi or a chemist. It does not characterize him that he becomes this or that. In the philosopher, conversely, there is nothing whatever that is impersonal, and above all, his morality bears decided and decisive witness to who he is. That is, in what order of rank the innermost drives of his nature stand in relation to each other. So he's saying other people, when they do stuff, it's like, they're just working hard, and maybe they have some sort of cool thing that's going on, but maybe not. Morals are a very important term, but it might be where he gets into the language detour you mentioned. Yep, I agree. This is what I think. So this is where I come from on this stuff. So I think it's just tying like what the person wants to be. It's just saying there's some sort of something based in the character that what characterizes him. when it comes to the philosophers. What characterizes philosophers has to do with their character. And it's personal for them. Everyone else, he's saying, you could have gone into like this profession or that profession. Could have been a scientist here. You could have been a scientist there. It's cool. Like you could have done a bunch of things. But for the philosophers, it's more personal. How malicious philosophers can be. I know of nothing more venomous than the joke Epicurus permitted himself against Plato and the Platonists. He called them Dionysiokolakes. Dionysiokolakes. That means literally, and this is the foreground meaning, flatterers of Dionysus. In other words, tyrants, baggage, and lickspittles. But in addition to this, he also wants to say they are all actors. There is nothing genuine about them. For Dionysiokolakes was a popular name for an actor. Oh, so he's calling them all actors. Okay. And flatterers of Dionysus, just sort of like kiss-ups, I guess. It's kind of nice to have definitions, so they write a whole corpus defining a term, then it's outdated immediately. Yeah, that happens. So, I mean, of course, sometimes they last, but not always. And the latter really is the malice that the Epicureans aimed at Plato. He was peeved by the grandiose manner, the mise en scene at which Plato and his disciples were so expert, at which Epicurus was not an expert. He, that old schoolmaster from Samos, who sat hidden away in his little garden at Athens and wrote 300 books, who knows, perhaps from rage and ambition against Plato. It took 100 years until Greece found out who this garden god Epicurus had been. Did they find out? Yeah, so he's saying you're all kiss-ups. You're trying to do something. Actors trying to show that you're doing something fancier than you are. They laugh precisely because they're failure to define anything at all. I want to give people some credit. Even if nothing lasts forever. It's like no definitions are just forever. No true Scotsman. Oops, yeah. That's fair. But no definitions last forever. So everyone's hoping for a good run. So you have to be fair to people, even if it's not the best thing ever. You give some people credit, it might have worked for some people at some times, and for some people it worked for a long time, and that was good. But you don't want to. You want to give some people their due. For instance, you take. We already quoted Descartes earlier. The think before. I think therefore I am. I was gonna say I think before you leap. That's lasted a long time. People seem to like it. Do we even know exactly what he meant by it? Not entirely. People argue about this still. So it's all right. You can give Descartes his due, and even if you don't like it, you can just move on. There is a point in every philosophy when the philosopher's conviction appears on the stage, or to use the language of an ancient mystery. I have no idea what this is. Adventavit asinus pulcher et fortissimus. See if they say, the ass arrived, beautiful and most brave. See, he's just being a jerk here, Nietzsche is. Of course, at some point, every philosopher has to lay their cards on the table, as we would say contemporarily. It's to use, you have to, the conviction appears on stage. You lay your cards out, and that's what you get. Now, granted, you lay your cards on the table. It only has matter in the game. And so that's where your conviction appears on the stage. So in your game you're playing, then you lay your cards out. Now, it's just what you have to do. Otherwise, you're not playing. Of course you can not play at all, but then you're playing a different game. According to nature, you want to live. Or, you noble Stoics, what deceptive words these are. Imagine a being like nature, wasteful beyond measure, indifferent beyond measure, without purpose and consideration, without mercy and justice, fertile and desolate and uncertain at the same time. Imagine indifference itself as a power. How could you live according to this indifference? Living is not that precisely wanting to be other than this nature. Is not living, estimating, preferring, being unjust, being limited, wanting to be different. And suppose your imperative, live according to nature, meant at bottom as much as live according to life. How could you not do that? Why make a principle of what you yourself are and must be? Okay, so I'm not exactly sure where he's going with this. Is he just angry at the Stoics? Maybe. In truth, the matter is altogether different. While you pretend rapturously to read the canon of your law and nature, you want something opposite. You strange actors and self-deceivers. Your pride wants to impose your morality, your ideal on nature, even on nature, and incorporate them in her. You demand that she should be nature according to the Stoa, and you would like all existence to exist only after your own image, as an immense eternal glorification and generalization of Stoicism. For all your love of truth, you have forced yourself so long, so persistently, so rigidly, hypnotically to see nature the wrong way, namely stoically, that you are no longer able to see her differently. And some abysmal arrogance finally still inspires you with this insane hope that because you know how to tyrannize yourselves, Stoicism is self-tyranny, nature, too, lets herself be tyrannized. Is not the Stoic a piece of nature? Wow, he hates the Stoics. I didn't realize he hated the Stoics so much. He really hates the Stoics. But this is an ancient eternal story. What formerly happened with Stoics still happens today too, as soon as any philosophy begins to believe in itself. It always creates the world in its own image. It cannot do otherwise. Philosophy is this tyrannical drive itself, the most spiritual will to power, the creation of the world, to the causa prima. That is literature. The metaphor is literature. Yes. Well, Nietzsche could at least write. Boy, does he hate the Stoics, though. I didn't realize that. He's talking to the other books in the library. Yeah. It's like, yeah. See, this is a fair criticism, though. It's like, what do you mean by nature? And just as I was criticizing Nietzsche above for what do you mean by morals, then he's criticizing the Stoics by saying, what do you mean by nature? What is natural? It's actually not saying anything. And in not saying anything, it becomes basically whatever they want it to be, which is Stoic. No, I mean the audience's other books. Yeah, okay. That's fair. The other books. Oh, okay. The Collective Five. The Collective. Yeah. So live according to life. How could you not do that? What principle do you want? To the different you want to... Yeah, you're basically... Yeah, well, it's when you have these sort of grand proclamations. Usually it just means you're doing things according to the way the person who's proclaiming them wants them to be. Alright. Try that on as you read it. That this is directed at all the other books in the library? I don't know. I didn't know other books could read books, so I thought it was at the people, and definitely at the Stoics. Like, this is... I don't know if you know any Stoics. They're around. They do exist. And I don't think this is actually a bad criticism of them. I think this is kind of it still hits. So the Stoics, I know. I think this would actually it's not exactly a bad the criticism still works. And so I think this is sort of really well directed. Okay, it can give a very important reading that I think hints at this being the accused is the other texts. All right. To be fair, he was a philologist, a classicist. So when he's talking about Stoics, he probably means the Stoic literature, the text. He's writing in metaphor all the time. I don't think he could be. I don't think he is right here. I think he's yelling at the Stoics, like the actual people. But you could be right. I could be wrong. Maybe. I don't know on that one. Okay, let's keep going. 10. The eagerness and subtlety, I might even say shrewdness, with which the problem of the real and the apparent world is today attacked all over Europe makes one think and wonder, and anyone who hears nothing in the background except a will to truth certainly does not have the best of years. In rare and isolated instances, it may really be the case that such a will to truth, some extravagant and adventurous courage, a metaphysician's ambition to hold hopeless position, may participate and ultimately prefer even a handful of certainty to a whole carload of beautiful possibilities. There may actually be puritanical fanatics of conscience who prefer even a certain nothing to an uncertain something to lie down on and die. But this nihilism and the sign of a despairing, mortally weary soul, however courageous the gestures of such a virtue may look. Like, just try it on your mind for 2 paragraphs. For me, it's a cognitive switch. The question of, like, how am I analyzing this? Like, do I think he's just writing in metaphor all the time? Not as 12 seems to say that is big. He's an actor, and he has all along been writing in various degrees of fiction, and he even tells you so as he does it. That's fine, too. I don't actually mind him, like, acting it out and, like, being sort of reflexive in that way. You don't get I don't give you a pass, though. Just because you're doing that sort of thing, I don't give them a pass. You're still making claims. You're still, like, sometimes speaking in your own voice and sometimes speaking, like, in the actor's voice, and it's very hard to sort out. That's fair. But, like, if he's doing that, then he's still, like, getting up and, like, putting all this effort into making these things, and he doesn't look like he's making an ass of himself as he's doing it. If he was, like, doing it in, yeah, but you see that, what, like, his whole life? I'm not sure about that. Like, his whole life is like that, then? It's hard, it's one of those things where it's hard to lie for that long and that consistently. You end up saying what you mean to say sometimes. And it's like, why would he write the book of saying a whole book of things that he doesn't actually believe in? It's like, you might write a whole book of fiction, but you write the whole book of fiction because you want to say some of that in there. And it's like, this whole book here, he's not going to write a whole book here and then just be like, it was all wrong. It was just for fun. It was all funsies. I didn't mean anything by it. It's too hard, too much time and effort to do this. He may have, like, gone back at the end. So he makes suggestions between works. He may do that at times, but again, all this takes too much effort. You don't do that and just be like, oh, I was just making a little joke my whole life. I mean, maybe he was. Maybe that's why he went crazy. But it's just too much of a pain in the butt, like novelists do. Novelists do that because they want to write. They want to say those things, and they need a medium to say them in. And same thing with philosophers. He needs a way to say what he wants to say. He is not only doing it for funsies. It's like, just whatever. It's like, oh, it'll be fun if I say this. It's not Nietzsche. He has a will to something, and it's not just like a silly will. He's been talking about that already. So, you have to take what people say seriously. And I agree, he says stuff like that, but you have to take the other stuff he says seriously too. The eagerness and subtlety, I might even say shrewdness, with which the problem of the real and... Oh, did I read this already? Yeah. And the whole point was down here. This nihilism and the sign of a despairing, morally weary soul, however courageous the gestures of such a virtue may look. This is nihilism. Yeah, so you look at it literally, so you see literature. Seriously, I think I'm accidentally coming at it from a reading rather than, yeah. I come at everything from the philosophical, ideological side. If you're looking at it as literature, that's fine too. It's like, that's a fine reading. But I mean, I'm a philosophy person. I read stuff from the philosophy side. So, It seems, however, to be otherwise with stronger and livelier thinkers who are still eager for life, when they side against appearance and speak of perspective, with a new arrogance, when they rank the credibility of their own bodies about as low as the credibility of the visual evidence that the earth stands still, and thus apparently in good humor, let their securest possession go. For in what does one at present believe more firmly than in one's body? Who knows if they are not trying at bottom to win back something that was formerly an even securer possession, something of the ancient domain of the faith of former times, perhaps the immortal soul, perhaps the old God, in short, the ideas by which one could live better, that is to say, more vigorously and cheerfully than by modern ideas. There is mistrust of these modern ideas. In this attitude, a disbelief in all that has been constructed yesterday and today, there is perhaps some slight admixture of satiety and scorn, unable to endure any longer the bric-a-brac of the concepts of the most diverse origin, which is the form in which so-called positivism offers itself on the market today, a disgust of the more fastidious taste at the village fair motleyiness and patchiness of all these reality philophasters, in whom there is nothing new or genuine except this motleyiness. In this, it seems to me, we should agree with these skeptical anti-realists and knowledge microscopists of today. Their instinct which repels them from modern reality is unrefuted. What do their retrograde bypaths concern us? The main thing about them is not that they wish to go back, but they wish to get away. A little more strength, flight courage, and artistic power, and they want to rise, not return. Is it okay that I'm philosophically very curious about that, as if I was a Vesco question? I don't know what Vesco is. I mean making a distinction between literary readings and other types. Is it a philosophical question itself? It just seems one of the two must rule. No, there's no hard and fast distinction between literature and philosophy. It's basically what you want to do with it. If you want to look at it from the literature side, you're just going to get different sort of things. Than if you do from like the analytic or like continental or like just academic philosophy side of things. It's just again, there's differences among people and like goals and stuff, and so it's like you're going to it was a philosophical question. Dictation, okay. The distinction between the different ways of looking at stuff is usually comes down to being kind of arbitrary in the end. If you get something good out of it, it's going to have a philosophical analysis. It's going to have other sort of analyses too. You're going to be like literature or rhetorical. You're going to be able to look at things in different ways. So it's not like there's more than one way to ask a good question. Is there something philosophically interesting about reading a philosopher as a literary thinker? Of course there is. Of course there is. I mean, it depends on, like I said, you're just going to get different sorts of results. And so sometimes the results will be good, sometimes they'll be bad, but you don't always know. And so then finding out what the differences are, then you can find out something interesting there too. Because like there's a philosophy of literature. Alright, so keep going. Let's see. Yeah, so what is Nietzsche complaining about here? It's very complaining in my opinion, this book. It says you're trying to get back to something, but like this state of nature, like in terms of Rousseau, like the old God, some immortal soul, there's a mistrust in this stuff nowadays, and people are trying to find something. You don't worry too much about what you're trying to force and try not to. You just do what you can. If you try to like resist your forcing, then you end up double forcing, and that's even worse. So just run with it for now. See where you get. We should agree with the skeptical anti-realists and acknowledge microscopists of the day. You feel I'm doing it wrong when I don't want to. Yeah, well, maybe you have to work on your writing then. I mean, usually you don't want to have these gigantic sentences either, but eh. Agree. Their instinct, which repels them from modern reality, is unrefuted. What do their retrograde bypaths concern us? The main thing about them is not that they wish to go back, but that they wish to get away. So people are repelled from like the sort of modernity, is what he's saying here, and that the fact that we just don't have the science is not giving us what we want, the apparent world. And so people are trying to get away from this sort of everyday life nowadays. Okay, maybe that's okay. It seems to me today, attempts are made everywhere to divert attention from the actual influence Kant exerted on German philosophy, and especially to ignore prudently the value he set upon himself. Kant was first and foremost proud of his table of categories. With that in his hand, he said, "This is the most difficult thing that could ever be undertaken on behalf of metaphysics." It's admiration. Let us only understand this could be. He was proud of having discovered a new faculty in man, the faculty for synthetic judgments a priori. Suppose he deceived himself in this matter. The development and rapid flourishing of German philosophy depended nevertheless on his pride and on the eager rivalry of the younger generation to discover, if possible, something still prouder, at all events, new faculties. But let us reflect. It is high time to do so. How are synthetic judgments a priori possible? Kant asked himself, and what really is his answer? By virtue of a faculty. But unfortunately not in 5 words, but so circumstantially, venerably, and with such display of German profundity and curlicues that people simply failed to note the comical Naser Allemande, let's see, what's that? German foolishness involved in such an answer. People were actually beside themselves with delight over this new faculty, and the jubilation reached its climax when Kant further discovered a moral faculty in man, for at that time Germans were still moral and not yet addicted to realpolitik. The honeymoon of German philosophy arrived. All the young theologians of the Tübingen seminary went into the bushes looking for faculties, and what did they not find? In that innocent, rich, and still youthful period of the German spirit, to which Romanticism, the malignant fairy, piped and sang when one could not yet distinguish between finding and inventing. Above all, a faculty for the supra-sensible. Schelling christened it intellectual intuition, and thus gratified the most heartfelt cravings of the Germans, whose cravings were at the bottom pious. One can do no greater wrong to the whole of this exuberant and enthusiastic movement, which was really youthfulness, however boldly it disguised itself in hoary and senile concepts, than to take it seriously, or worse, to treat it with moral indignation. Enough, one grew older and the dream vanished. A time came when people scratched their heads, and they still scratch them today. One had been dreaming, and first and foremost, old Kant, by virtue of a faculty, he had said, or at least meant. But is that an answer, an explanation, or is it not rather merely a repetition of the question, how does opium induce sleep? By virtue of a faculty, namely the virtuous dormitiva, replies the doctor in Moliere. So, it's like math. I respect their lifestyle, logicians, and mathematicians, their exceeding skill. I'm just not in the same priesthood. Same building, though. Yeah, exactly, fair enough. But like I said, there's more than one way to do stuff. So it's like, some people do it this way, other people do it that way. It's like, yeah. So yeah, he's hitting on Kant now. Because again, virtue of a faculty doesn't tell you anything about basically anything. It's just repeating the question. But such replies belong in comedy, and it is high time to replace the Kantian question, how are synthetic judgments a priori possible, by another question, why is belief in such judgments necessary? And to comprehend that such judgments must be believed to be true for the sake of the preservation of creatures like ourselves, though they might of course be false judgments for all that. Or to speak more clearly and coarsely, synthetic judgments a priori should not be possible at all. We have no right to them. In our mouths they are nothing but false judgments. Only, of course, the belief in their truth is necessary as a foreground belief and visual evidence for evidence belonging to the perspective optics of life. So he's calling them out. It's like, you don't have any of these like fancy like faculties of to do these fancy judgments. It's I mean, personally, I never really like people appealing to intuition. I don't know what intuition is. For all I know, I got it from Nietzsche. But like this sort of thing here where people are saying, well, I have a faculty, I have an intuition to this. It's like, I don't know what the hell you're talking about. So it's like, yeah, so you're just, all I get is that you like it or you think this is the way to go. And so if you're criticizing Kant for that, I mean, I'm all with you on this one. You're looking for just faculties or intuitions or whatever else. I always, it amuses me when I read papers, and I read one a while back, and they said, like, let me prime your thought, let me give you an intuition pump, like, to basically prime you to think in the way that they want you to think about the stuff. But I mean, I'm just reading, like, intuition pump, I just want to, like the face palm, like, I really just, makes me face palm. Finally, to call to mind the enormous influence that German philosophy, I hope you understand it is right to quotation marks, has exercised throughout the whole of Europe. There is no doubt a certain Virtus Dormitiva had a share in it. It was a delight to the noble idlers, the virtuous, the mystics, artists, three-quarter Christians, and political obscurantists of all nations to find, thanks to German philosophy, an antidote to the still predominant sensualism which overflowed from the last century into this, in short, sensus superior. I kind of like this term right here. I think this is very cute. Three-quarter Christians. I think we got a lot of those. If you have an email address you give out, I don't have an email address, I give it out on Twitch, but of course you can message me on Twitch. You can send me a private message right there, and I'll get it on Twitch. You whisper. So. I mean, unless you're writing me a book. I don't have time to read your book. But, I mean, if you have an email, like an email length stuff, you could definitely just message me on Twitch. It'll be fine. I'll get it. But thanks for coming by. I appreciate it. Thanks for the comments. Yeah. Actually, I'm going to go get some water in that case, too. So I'm out of water. Maybe a beer. I'll be right back myself. Alright, cool. Oh, okay, yeah. So you can do that with a noob here. No, just hello and didn't fail. Enjoy Whisper. Okay, cool. So let's see, where are we? At 12. Yeah, again, thanks for stopping by, sending semiotics. I appreciate it. Actually, as for materialistic atomism, it is one of the best refuted theories there are, and in Europe perhaps no one in their learned world is now so unscholarly as to attach serious significance to it, except for convenient household use, as an abbreviation of the means of expression, thanks chiefly to the Dalmatian Boscovich. He and the Pole Copernicus have been the greatest and most successful opponents of visual evidence so far. For while Copernicus has persuaded us to believe, contrary to all the senses, that the earth does not stand fast, Boscovich has taught us to abjure the belief in the last part of the earth that stood fast, the belief in the substance, in matter, in the earth residuum part. Let's see. Like up at the top by where my like icon is, the thing that looks actually like a okay, cool. This looks like a jack to plug in like a phone or an Ethernet cable. You click on it, it says Whispers there, and you can search for names. There we go. So I sent you a whisper if you're still there. Okay. Either way. Boscovich has taught us to abjure the belief that the last part of the earth stood fast, the belief in substance, in matter, in the earth residuum and particle atom. It is the greatest triumph over the senses that has been gained on earth so far. Who is Boscovich? Was he some sort of physicist? I don't know. One must, however, go still further. Maybe he was a wave theorist. One of the early wave theorists, I don't know. One must, however, go still further and also declare war, relentless war unto death, against the atomistic need, which still leads a dangerous afterlife in places where no one suspects it, just like the more celebrated metaphysical need. One must also, first of all, give the finishing stroke to that other and more calamitous atomism which Christianity has taught best and longest, the soul atomism. Let it be permitted to designate by this expression the belief which regards the soul as something indestructible, eternal, indivisible, as a monad, as an atomon. This belief ought to be expelled from science. Between ourselves, it is not at all necessary to get rid of the soul at the same time and thus renounce one of the most ancient and venerable hypotheses, as happens frequently to clumsily naturalists who can hardly touch on the soul without immediately losing it. But the way is open for new versions and refinements of the soul hypothesis, and such conceptions as mortal soul, and soul as subjective multiplicity, and soul as social structure of the drives and affects, want henceforth to have citizens' rights in science. When the new psychologist puts an end to the superstitions which have so far flourished with almost tropical luxuriance around the idea of the soul, he practically exiles himself into a new desert and a new suspicion. It is possible that the older psychologist had a merrier and more comfortable time of it. Eventually, however, he finds that precisely thereby he also condemns himself to invention, and, who knows, perhaps to discovery. So now Nietzsche wants to redefine the soul? Okay. I mean, this whole thing right here. It's like, okay, so the fundamental concepts that we thought were true in the past were not true. And then he wants to turn the sort of like the Copernican revolution, or like the anti-atomism, that like, maybe we're not made of like pieces of like physical, like hard physical things, but maybe there's like a lot of space in our atoms, or they're made of waves and other weird things. He wants to take that sort of willingness to change fundamental concepts and like change about our soul too. Again, where's he going with this? Like, he wants, of course, us to do the things his way, but that's what he was saying earlier. Physiologists should think before putting down the instinct of self-preservation as the cardinal instinct of an organic being. A living thing seeks above all to discharge its strength. Life itself is will to power. Self-preservation is only one of the indirect and most frequent results. In short, here as everywhere else, let us be aware of superfluous teleological principles, one of which is the instinct of self-preservation. We owe to Spinoza's inconsistency. Thus, method, which must be essentially the economy of principles, demands it. I have no idea what he thinks he's doing right here. A living thing seeks above all to discharge its strength. What the heck is this? What is the strength then? Life itself is will to power. What is a thing's strength, though? I'm just like, I don't. This is the first time this is a term shown up so far, and I just don't know. It's like I'm confused, because all of a sudden I've seen these will to things before, like you will to live, will to that, will to power, but we've got strength and power right here. And just as Nietzsche was criticizing the other folks for their desires for, like, he was sort of like saying they're being petty and all the things that they say that they're desiring to do, it's like it's only one little thing. Well, why is this strength or will to power special here? I don't know. Let's keep going. It is perhaps just dawning on 5 or 6 minds that physics, too, is only an interpretation and exegesis of the world, to suit us, if I may say so, and not a world explanation. Well, this is a fun sentence because, of course this is true. I mean, it is still our physics, and there's plenty of anti-realists still relative to us. But insofar as it is based on belief in the senses, it is regarded as more, and for a long time to come must be regarded as more, namely as an explanation. Eyes and fingers speak in its favor, visual evidence and palpableness do too. This strikes an age with fundamentally plebeian tastes as fascinating, persuasive, and convincing. After all, it follows instinctively the canon of truth of eternally popular sensualism. What is clear, what is explained. Only what can be seen and felt. Every problem has to be pursued to that point. Excuse me. Oof. I had a good dinner today, but it's given me a little bit of indigestion. Conversely, the charm of the Platonic way of thinking, which was a noble way of thinking, consisted precisely in resistance to obvious sense evidence, perhaps among men who enjoyed even stronger and more demanding senses than our contemporaries, but who knew how to find a higher triumph in remaining masters of their senses, and this by means of pale, cold, gray concept nets, which they threw over the motley whirl of the senses, the mob of the senses, as Plato said. In this overcoming of the world and interpreting of the world in the manner of Plato, there was an enjoyment different from that which the physicists of today offer us, and also the Darwinists and anti-teleologists. See, this is what here we go. For semiotics, if you see this right here, Darwinists definitely knew about Darwin, and anti-teleologists among the workers in physiology, with their principle of the smallest possible force and the greatest possible stupidity. Where man cannot find anything to see or grasp, he has no further business. That is certainly an imperative different from the Platonic one, but it may be the right imperative for a tough, industrious race of machinists and bridge builders of the future with nothing but rough work to do. Yeah. I mean, what's he complaining about now? Yeah, I guess it's that our concepts are not doing. They're not as grand as they may make themselves out to be. Our concepts are not. They may be less tied to the world and more tied to how we like to think about ourselves. And so basically if we get down to it, a lot of people, they're more interested in the sensuous stuff because that's what rough work, like if you're in the down and dirty, you don't really care about these big ideas, or you care about them, but like because it, as he was saying about the Greek way of doing things, because you're so down and dirty in the world, you really like the high concepts to give you mastery over yourself in the world. But when you're not doing that anymore, then what are these high concepts doing except for just building themselves up? To study physiology with a clear conscience, one must insist that the sense organs are not phenomena in the sense of idealistic philosophy. As such, they could not be causes. Sensualism, therefore, at least as a regulative hypothesis, if not as a heuristic principle. Okay, so now this is just like straight up philosophy of mind right here. What? And others even say that the external world is the work of our organs, but then our body as part of this external world would be the work of our organs. But then our organs themselves would be the work of our organs. It seems to me that this is complete reductio ad absurdum, assuming that the concept of causa sui is something fundamentally absurd. Consequently, the external world is not the work of our organs. Hey, this is like a straight up argument right here. You got a little reductio. So, basically what he's saying is, look, if if we were just creating the world, then we'd be creating ourselves and creating our own organs out of our own organs, but then they'd be their self causes. So, causa sui, self cause. And so that's not possible. Hold up one sec. I think I've got an ad going. Nope, I don't have an ad going. It's just a different song started playing. I don't know if you guys can hear it, but I have music going very quietly in the background. Drowns out any background noise. Oh yeah, anyone watching, feel free to ask questions. There are still harmless self-observers who believe that there are immediate certainties. For example, I think. So now we're finally getting to the Descartes. For example, I think, or as the superstition of Schopenhauer put it, I will, as though knowledge here got hold of its object purely and nakedly as a thing in itself, without any falsification on the part of either the subject or the object, but that immediate certainty, as well as absolute knowledge and the thing in itself, involve a contradictio in adjecto. I shall repeat 100 times, we really ought to free ourselves from the seduction of words. Immediate certainty and absolute knowledge. Contradiction and adjective. What's that? 21. Contradiction between the noun and the adjective. So he's basically, he's still, I don't think, this is one of my problems with him. I don't think he's quite got the, he never escapes language. He calls it a name, this fallacy, I guess. But what does it actually, why is he... I don't think he actually understands the performative aspect here. This is sort of 20th century philosophy is after him. And so it's like he doesn't quite understand what's going on with the I will or I think. Like when you're doing something. I feel like he needs the old lesson from The Cynic, where someone was saying you can't, it was an argument from Zeno, and saying you can't actually do anything. Like, it's impossible to go anywhere because it's one of these Zeno arguments, because you can never take a step, because if you took half a step, then you took half of that, took half of that, took half of that, but you never get anywhere if you take that many half steps or whatever. So you can't actually walk. And, what's his name? Diogenes just says, look, I can disprove you. And he got up and he walked away. So it was proof by walking. That's what it was called. And so this is a sort of thing. There is a performative aspect here, and I don't think... I mean, that's an ancient example, but I don't think Nietzsche got that. And there's a bunch of 20th century philosophy where doing things with words. Austin is famous for that. Let the people suppose that knowledge means knowing things entirely. The philosopher must say to himself, when I analyze the process that is expressed in the sentence I think, I find a whole series of daring assertions that would be difficult, perhaps impossible to prove. For example, that it is I who think, that there must necessarily be something that thinks, that thinking is an activity and operation on the part of a being who is thought of as a cause, that there is an ego, and finally that there is already determined what is to be designated by thinking, that I know what thinking is. For if I had not already decided within myself what it is, by what standard could I determine whether that which just happened is not perhaps willing or feeling? In short, the assertion I think assumes that I compare my state to the present moment with the other states of myself which I know, in order to determine what it is. On account of this retrospective connection with further knowledge, it has, at any rate, no immediate certainty for me. So Nietzsche doesn't know what it is to think, and so he can't really say I think, because I don't know. He doesn't know what it is to think, and so the idea that it's reflexive, it never gets off the ground because he doesn't know how it can reflect on itself. Okay. I mean, it's going to be hard to sell that to anyone else. I know what you mean. It has no immediate certainty, but like a retrospective connection, because you don't know you can't guarantee that what you're saying thinking is actually applying to what is thinking, because if you don't know what thinking is, that's fair, but again, it's a very hard sell. In place of the immediate certainty in which the people may believe in the case at hand, the philosopher thus finds a series of metaphysical questions presented to him, truly searching questions of the intellect, to wit, from where do I get the concept of thinking? Why do I believe in cause and effect? What gives me the right to speak of an ego, and even of an ego as cause, and finally of an ego as the cause of thought? Whoever ventures to answer these metaphysical questions at once by an appeal to a sort of intuitive perception, like the person who says, I think and know that this, at least, is true, actual, and certain, will encounter a smile and two question marks from a philosopher nowadays. Sir, the philosopher will perhaps give him to understand, it is improbable that you are not mistaken, but why insist on the truth? So, it's like, yeah. With regard to the superstitions of logicians, I shall never tire of emphasizing a small terse fact, which these superstitious minds hate to concede, namely that a thought comes when it wishes, and not when I wish, so that it is a falsification of the facts of the case to say that the subject I is the condition of the predicate think. It thinks, but that this it is precisely the famous old ego is, to put it mildly, only a supposition, an assertion, and assuredly not an immediate certainty. After all, one has even gone too far with this. It thinks. Even the it contains an interpretation of the process and does not belong to the process itself. One infers here according to the grammatical habit. Thinking is an activity. Every activity requires an agent. Consequently, and get the trailing off. So he's saying there's like this logical operation that you're sort of building in the grammatical operation. This is just, again, this is why I criticize Nietzsche on his use of that he never escapes his grammar. He ends up doing too much analysis grammatically. He thinks it's a good way of going sometimes, and I think he's better up here when he sticks to the metaphysics. The thought comes when it does, not when I want it to. And so there's a question of what the it is, but that's fine. You can argue then why we think there's an it, but then he's having to appeal to this grammatical argument here, which is a little bit silly. because he hates on the grammar other times. But the question of what comes first is a much better question. This is a question of phenomenology. A lot of times asks, like, what is the experience of thought? It's not the derivation of it. It's you get the object first, and then the reflection comes afterwards. So this is the good part. This is the very sort of questionable part in my mind. So like this is good. So you get like the happy little star, and then down here you get the question mark. Wonder how far I can get in this book. It was pretty much according to the same schema that the older atomism sought. Besides the operating power, that lump of matter in which it resides and out of which it operates, the atom. More rigorous minds, however, learned at last to get along without this earth residuum, and perhaps someday we shall accustom ourselves, including the logicians, to get along without the little it, which is all that is left of the honest little old ego. Cutesy. What I actually think is going on here is he's, there is the existential force, in logic. Nowadays you see it with the backwards E. It's called the existential quantifier. In the old Greek, syllogistic logic from Aristotle, which I'm sure Nietzsche was, familiar with, they didn't have this sort of existential thing. That was maybe published a year or two within this, but it was not something he would have read. I could almost guarantee you that Nietzsche did not read Frege, even though they probably lived not too far from each other. But the idea that Nietzsche read Frege seems very, 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 very unlikely. But in the old syllogistic logic, you'd have different sorts of concepts of existing things that are not built into, like, some things did this and like all things are there. And so the question of like where the existential force was when you say like some X are Y or all A's are B's, there's definitely, I'm not an expert on this, but I have heard something on these things before. But I mean, it's like the idea that all A's are B's. Did it mean that there are actually A's when you say they're all A's are B's? Is that a hypothetical? Like if there were all A's, then they'd all be B's, or it means all the A's that exist, and they do exist. And so there isn't it when you're talking about it in the logical way. And so this is the existential force, which perhaps we should separate out from the logic a lot of times. Sirkian, what's up? I have no Dorito chips at the moment. I only have a beer. And I'm not playing Minesweeper. I'm reading Nietzsche for some very strange reason. Yes. Thank you for stopping by. I'm reading Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil. I'm reading it because like it's in these like little itsy bite-sized paragraphs, and so then I get to like talk about it. You were just about to ask for a Dorito chip. Well, let me actually go check if I have any. Oh my God, I have a few Dorito chips. So there you go. I mean, if you want to share it with Bubba Bloop, I mean, you can share one with Bubba Bloop, but you don't have to. I mean, I'm not saying you should. There we go. Where's my let's go? I gotta let's go. Oh well. More Dorito chips. Okay. You can kick his ass. Go ahead. Yes, those are for you. 4 Dorito chips for Sirkian. Yeah, so. He's a big softie, that Bubba Bloop. Okay, so let's see. I'm gonna... Ooh, 18 short. Okay, I won't tell him. Hey, Fosdick, how's it going? Everyone's showing up all of a sudden. Yeah, I'm reading some Nietzsche and giving Sirkian some Dorito chips. Alright. It is certainly not the least charm of a theory that is refutable. It is precisely thereby that it attracts subtler minds. It seems that the 100 times refuted theory of a free will owes its persistence to this charm alone. Again and again, someone comes along who feels he is strong enough to refute it. I don't know what Nietzsche is doing here. Again, it's very confusing to me. Like, he keeps switching it up. I think he can't continue a thought sometimes. See, up here he's yelling at the logicians. Then all of a sudden, he's now down here being like, yeah, sometimes we like theories because it's fun to yell at them. Maybe. The charm of free will. Well, why do we like free will? Is it just fun to argue against? I don't know. But why is he bothering yelling at free will now? I don't know. It's not the least not the least charm of a theory that is refutable. It's just you want people to think that you can do something. I mean, yeah, people like to think that they're doing something. It's like, okay, let's go refute free will. Yeah. Oh yeah. Anyway, feel free to ask questions about this stuff. I'm just like reading it and just riffing off of whatever. Anyway, how you froze dick? How's everything going? Philosophers are accustomed to speak of the will as it were the best known thing in the world. Indeed, Schopenhauer has given us to understand that the will alone is really known to us, absolutely and completely known, without subtraction or addition. But again, I'm glad to hear that, froze dick. But again and again, it seems to me that in this case, too, Schopenhauer only did what philosophers are in the habit of doing. He adopted a popular prejudice and exaggerated it. Yeah, willing seems to me to be above all something complicated, something that is a unit only as a word, and it is precisely in this one word that the popular prejudice lurks, which has defeated the always inadequate caution of philosophers. So let us for once more be cautious, let us be unphilosophical. Let us say that in all willing there is first a plurality of sensations, namely the sensation of the state away from which, the sensation of the state towards which, the sensations of this from and towards themselves, and also accompanying muscular sensation, which, even without our putting into motion arms and legs, begins its action by force of habit as soon as anything we will anything. Okay, so now it's making some more sense. Because just as I was saying what he was doing was smart up here, it's like we have this sort of superstition, then we where we have like what was I saying? I mean, you want to know, it was really weird. One of the other regular watchers earlier, if you check out this video earlier, he was involved in a murder. Like he didn't murder anyone, but like there was a murder right in front of him. Like so it's kind of a weird day for him. So he's very happy to be just sitting around on Twitch now. But like that was like it's like okay, that's kind of an odd thing to have happened, but sure. So yeah, so this is what I was saying up here is superstitious minds, that their thoughts come to us, not we don't come to thoughts. So this is Nietzsche at his best metaphysics, where he's understanding how we actually interact with our own thoughts. We don't think them up. We kind of do, but they don't come when you want them to. They come whenever they come. And then down here, when he starts to rail about free will, I'm like, what's he talking about? But he's like saying, okay, let's break up the understanding of like our willing something. Like we don't will the thoughts. Like a lot of times we're going towards the thoughts, we're going away from thoughts, and that's kind of what's happening. We're willing, or anything we will, we're going towards and away. But it's not like one little thing. It's not just like there's a will and it goes and we just have it. So bop. Doesn't make sense. He's saying, okay, let's pull that sort of experience apart, just as we pulled the experience apart of like how we come to thoughts. Like, do we just think them up and then we got them, or are we thinking on them and then sometimes they just hit us? Therefore, just as sensations, and indeed many kinds of sensations, are to be recognized as ingredients of the will, so secondly should thinking also. In every act of the will there is a ruling thought. Let us not imagine it possible to sever this thought from the willing, as if any will would then remain. Okay, so thoughts are part of the willing. Third, the will is not only a complex of sensation and thinking, but it is above all an effect, and specifically the effect of the command. Really? That which is termed freedom of the will is essentially the effect of superiority in relation to him who must obey. I am free, he must obey. This consciousness is inherent in every will, and equally so the straining of the attention, the straight look that fixes itself exclusively on one aim, the unconditional evaluation that this and nothing else is necessary now, the inward certainty that obedience will be rendered, and whatever else belongs to this position of the commander. A man who wills commands something within himself that renders obedience, or that he believes renders obedience. That's a good question. Like, if you say I have freedom of the will, like freedom over what? Or freedom from what? It's like saying there's somebody to be commanded. What, you got like a little homunculus in yourself that like your will is commanding to do stuff, and then the homunculus is like playing, like driving your body around? But now let us notice what is strangest about the will, this manifold thing for which the people have only one word, inasmuch as in the given circumstances we are at the same time the commanding and the obeying parties, and as the obeying party we know the sensations of constraint, impulsion, pressure, resistance, and motion, which usually begin immediately after the act of will. Inasmuch as, on the other hand, we are accustomed to disregard this duality and to deceive ourselves about it by means of the synthetic concept I, a whole series of erroneous conclusions and consequently of false evaluations of the will itself has become attached to the act of willing, to such a degree that he who wills believes sincerely that willing suffices for action, since in the great majority of cases there has been exercise of will only when the effect of the command, that is obedience, that is the action, was to be expected. The appearance has translated itself into the feeling as if there were a necessity of effect. In short, he who wills believes with a fair amount of certainty that will and action are somehow one. He ascribes the success, the carrying out of the willing, to the will itself, and thereby enjoys an increase of the sensation of power, which accompanies all success. Okay, so now he's sort of like saying, we don't know what will is, but we're throwing the word around willy-nilly. And so we feel really good about being like, oh man, this was like our will and we have control over things. And so you get the sensation of having power by having a very loose understanding of the will, and so you actually think you're way more powerful than you are because you're applying will all over the place, and you're like, look at all the great things I've willed, I've accomplished as my power, I'm powerful. So he's saying we don't actually, he's sort of doubting that we have the power we think we do. Freedom of the will, that is the expression for the complex state of delight of the person exercising volition, who commands at the same time, identifies himself with the executor of the order, who as such enjoys also the triumph over obstacles, but thinks within himself that it was really his will itself that overcame them. Wow, that was a wacky sentence. Freedom of the will, that is the expression for the complex state of delight of the person exercising volition. So he's basically saying freedom of the will is we're kind of like just pleasuring ourselves. We're giving ourselves delight by thinking we have freedom of the will. So as such, enjoys also the triumph over obstacles, but thinks within himself that it was really his will that overcame them. So you're fooling yourself that you think that you're willing yourself in some sense. In this way, the person exercising volition adds the feeling of delight of his successful executive instruments, the useful underwills. The useful underwills, or undersouls, indeed, our body is but a social structure composed of many souls, to his feeling of delight as commander. L'effet c'est moi. What happens here is what... I am the effect, yeah. What happens here is what happens in every well-constructed and happy commonwealth, namely the governing class identifies itself with the successes of the commonwealth. In all willing, it is absolutely a question of the commanding and obeying on the basis, as already said, of a social structure composed of many souls. Hence, a philosopher should claim the right to include the willing as such within the sphere of morals. Morals being understood as the doctrine of relations of supremacy under which the phenomena of life comes to be. Okay, so now we've gotten what Nietzsche, this is sort of like his strategy right here. He's pulling willing under the moral sphere. So, yeah. So we got the sphere of morals. That was a terrible line. I can't seem. I'm losing. I can't draw anymore. Try and draw a straight line. There we go. Straight line. I can draw a straight line. So, hence a philosopher. Hence, Nietzsche is claiming the right to include willing as such within the sphere of morals, because willing is putting a this commanding and obeying, and Nietzsche just sees commanding and obeying as a moral thing. So we've got commanding and obeying as part of the sphere of morals. And so the will... Well, see, here's the problem with it. Because people feel the will and they like it, then the commanding and obey is part of the sphere of morals. But wasn't he just saying above, or wasn't I saying just above, that the will isn't what we think it is? Because I thought that's what he was saying up above here. And so just because we delight with our volitions, that puts it under the commanding and obey. Excuse me. That puts it under the commanding and obeying. It's like, well, why? It's like, yes, it's related to the sphere with morals. It can be included within it. But why would it be the doctrine of the relation of supremacy under which the phenomenon of life comes to be? This is just like people, why is this just not doing exactly what he said was the bad thing? You're not understanding willing, and you're throwing it in with what you want it to be. And so, isn't this just all just very, very, like, doing exactly what the other people were doing? Or is this exactly, or is he not the philosopher here? Is he someone criticizing the philosopher? I can't see how he would be. That doesn't make sense. I mean, chat, tell me if I'm crazy here, but like, how could Nietzsche first be saying willing is not what we think it is, and then being like, well, but we're going to take willing as this sort of thing right here? Confusing to me. That individual philosophical concepts are not anything capricious or autonomously evolving, but grow up in connection and relationship with each other, that, however suddenly and arbitrarily they seem to appear in the history of thought, they nevertheless belong just as much to a system as all the members of the fauna of a continent, is betrayed in the end also by the fact that most diverse philosophers keep filling in a definite fundamental scheme of possible philosophies. Under an invisible spell, they always revolve once more in the same orbit. However independent of each other they may feel themselves with their critical or systematic wills, something within them leads them, something impels them in a definite order, one after the other, to wit, the innate systematic structure and relationship of their concepts. Their thinking is, in fact, far less a discovery than a recognition, a remembering, a return to a homecoming, to a remote, primordial, and inclusive household of the soul, out of which those concepts grew originally. Philosophizing is to this extent a kind of atavism of the highest order. Okay, fine. You're saying, look, we all of our concepts sort of come out of ourselves. That's fair. And so there's nothing so just arbitrary about them. They come out of us, and they come out of us at a time and place, and there's reasons for that. That's fine. I mean, people that think they're getting like the word of God, of course, that's a different sort of issue. The strange family resemblance of all Indian, Greek, and when was this book put out? This book was put out in '65, so the concept of family resemblance made a difference for Wittgenstein, but who knows if he ever read this. The strange family resemblance of all Indian, Greek, and German philosophizing is explained easily enough. Where there is affinity of languages, it cannot fail, owing to the common philosophy of grammar. Again with the grammar, Nietzsche, what are you doing? I mean, owing to the unconscious domination and guidance by similar grammatical functions, that everything is prepared at the outset for a similar development and sequence of philosophical systems. Just as the way seems barred against certain other possibilities of world interpretation, it is highly probable that philosophers within the domain of the Euro-Ataic languages, where the concept of the subjects least developed, looked otherwise into the world and will be found on paths of thought different from those of the Indo-Germanic peoples and the Muslims. The spell of certain grammatical functions is ultimately also the spell of physiological valuations and radical conditions. So much by the way of rejecting Locke's superficiality regarding the origin of ideas. I don't know what this is, but I mean, I'm very worried about Nietzsche and his grammar here. It's like, Nietzsche and his grammar, it's very worrisome to me. I don't think his, the idea that we all have similar grammatical functions is not going to fly. So, and and especially that you're going to appeal to the grammatical functions and then make any sort of philosophical system, everything is prepared at the outset for similar development and sequence of philosophical systems. Granted, a similar culture and similar grammar will, do you have any philosophical degree or just studying philosophy from? I have an undergraduate degree in philosophy. I've spent way too much time on this. I am a published philosopher. I have a publication in philosophy of logic. So this is one of my reasons why I harp on the grammar here. I actually know something about it. But yeah, this is just for, because basically we're still basically under quarantine here in New York, so might as well do something useful with my time because it can't really go anywhere else. So, broadcast on Twitch. Broadcast philosophy on Twitch. Yeah. But yeah, so this is feel free to ask questions. Anything is cool. Yeah, so that you're going to get yourself, like, people have radically different philosophical systems, even with, like, similar languages, so I just don't know if this is even historically accurate, or even if it was historically accurate at his time. So, it's like, come on, man. Grammar doesn't determine metaphysics. Oh, it can. And I think actually the German language may be more rigid in that way, but I'm not sure. The causa sui is the best self-contradiction that has been conceived so far. It is a sort of rape and perversion of logic, but the extravagant pride of man has managed to entangle itself profoundly and frightfully with just this nonsense. Wow, come on, this is going back to the Aristotle, really? Like, most people are not going to, like, hammer Aristotle that bad for this one. The desire for freedom of the will in the superlative metaphysical sense, which still holds sway, unfortunately, in the minds of the half-educated, the desire to bear the entire and ultimate responsibility for one's actions, oneself, and to absolve God, the world, ancestors, chance, and society involves nothing less than to be precisely this causa sui, and with more than Munchausen's audacity to pull oneself up into existence by the hair out of the swamp of nothingness. Suppose someone were thus to see through the boorish simplicity of the celebrated concept of free will and put it out on its head altogether. I beg of him to carry his enlightenment a step further, and also put out of his head the contrary of this monstrous conception of free will. I mean unfree will, which amounts to a misuse of cause and effect. One should not wrongly verify cause and effect as the natural scientists do, and whoever like them now naturalizes in his thinking, according to the prevailing mechanical doltishness which makes the cause press and push until it affects its end. One should use cause and effect only as pure concepts, that is to say, as conventional fictions for the purpose of designing and designation and communication, not for explanation. In itself, there is nothing of causal connections, of necessity, or of psychological non-freedom. There, the effect does not follow the cause. There is no rule of law. It is we alone who have devised cause sequence for each other, relativity, constraint, number, law, freedom, motive, and purpose. And when we project and mix the symbol world into things as if it existed in itself, we act once more as we have always acted, mythologically. The unfree will is mythology. In real life, it is only a matter of strong and weak wills. Okay, so this is now getting into like classic Nietzsche, as far as I understand him, is going mythological, and then you've got this sort of relative understanding of what's going on in sort of his own understanding of like what's good and what's bad. But yeah, again, this is his own sort of metaphysics here. Who knows? So, I mean, again, he's railing on free will with saying, look, we don't actually know what it is, and it's just some sort of thing people like to appeal to make themselves feel important, basically, and, like, powerful. But he's saying that's just a myth we tell ourselves, and the degree to which we have to rely on the understanding of, like, freedom of the will is a matter of how strong or weak we are on our own. We don't have to rely on the concept if we are strong, because he's definitely picking on people, half-educated, who see the desire for the will is still holds sway, unfortunately, in the minds of the half-educated. So he's tying people who like free will to being idiots. Although I'm not sure. Maybe he's not making fun of them for being educated, half-educated. Yeah, but he's saying how ridiculous it is, so I think he is against the half-educated here. I mean, maybe he was being anti-elite, but I think he's being a little elitist there. It is almost always a symptom of what is lacking in himself when a thinker senses in every causal connection and psychological necessity something of constraint, need, compulsion to obey, pressure, and unfreedom. It is suspicion to have such feelings, the person betrays himself. And in general, if I have observed correctly, the unfreedom of the will is regarded as a problem from two entirely opposite standpoints, but always in a profoundly personal matter. Some will not give up their responsibility, their belief in themselves, the personal right to their merits at any price. The vain races belong to this class. Others, on the contrary, do not wish to be answerable for anything or blamed for anything, and owing to an inhuman self-contempt, seek to lay the blame for themselves somewhere else. The latter, when they write books, are in the habit today of taking the side of criminals. A sort of socialist pity is their most attractive disguise. And, as a matter of fact, the fatalism of the weak-willed embellishes itself surprisingly when it can pose la religion de la souffrance humaine. That is, its good taste. So, he's criticizing people for being, using the freedom of the will as a crutch, and they say, well, they don't want to be unfree. They say, on one sense, the people who hate it are the ones that want to have all of the responsibility for themselves, and the other people who hate it are the ones that want to abstain from any responsibility and, be like, don't blame me for anything, it's society. So the two the two endpoints, the two like opposite poles, both really think the unfreedom of the will is heavily the ones who have the strongest feelings about the freedom of the will. Or unfreedom, as it were. Forgive me as an old philologist who cannot desist from the malice of putting his finger on bad modes of interpretation, but nature's conformity to law, of which you physicists talk so proudly as though why it exists owing to your interpretation and bad philology. It is no matter of fact, no text, but rather only a naively humanitarian emendation and perversion of meaning with which you make abundant concessions to the democratic instincts of the modern soul. Everywhere equality before the law, nature is no different in that respect, no better off than we are. A fine instance of ulterior motive, in which the plebeian antagonism to everything privileged and autocratic, as well as a second and more refined atheism, are disguised once more. Ne Dieu ne matre, that is what you do, that is what you too want, and therefore cheers for the law of nature. Is it not so? So I was saying, even the physicists, they're trying to hide their sort of, and you get this with the tech people now, actually. This is my criticism of sort of the tech companies. They basically saying, look, you're saying it's all nature is indifferent. It's just democratic. It treats everybody the same. And so, but in that sense, the ones who control the physics or the nature, the ones who define that, they're the ones who then are the best at it. They're the thing. That's what you do. That is what you two want. You want this to be the case. So, they're privileging what they like. And this is sort of how I view the tech companies at the moment. They want to say, oh, no, our tech is not moral. It's just, it's indifferent to it treats everybody the same. But that's not true. They sort of are, they're the ones in control of it. So it's good for them if everyone thinks it's neutral. But as said above, that is interpretation, not text. And someone might come along who, with opposite intentions and modes of interpretation, could read out of the same nature with regard to the same phenomena, rather the tyrannically inconsiderate and relentless enforcement of claims of power, an interpreter who would picture the unexceptional and unconditional aspects of all will to power so vividly that almost every word, even the word tyranny itself, would eventually seem an unsuitable or a weakening and attenuating metaphor, being too human, but he might nevertheless end by asserting the same about this world as you do, namely that it has a necessary and calculable course, not because the laws obtain it, but because they are absolutely lacking. And every power draws its ultimate consequences at every moment. Supposing that this also is only in interpretation, and you will be eager enough to make this objection, well, so much the better. Okay, so someone might come along and reinterpret the thing that was thought to be neutral in a very different way. Fine. And he's like, you know what, then that's okay. All psychology so far has got stuck in moral prejudices and fears. Has it not dared to descend into the depths? It has not dared to descend into the depths. To understand it as morphology and the doctrine of the development of the will to power, as I do, no one has yet come close to doing this even in thought, insofar as it is impermissible to recognize in what has been written so far a symptom of what has so far been kept silent. The power of moral prejudices has penetrated deeply into the most spiritual world, which would seem to be the coldest and most devoid of presuppositions, and has obviously operated in an injurious, inhibiting, blinding, and distorting manner. A proper physiopsychology has to contend with unconscious resistance in the heart of the investigator. It has the heart against it. Even a doctrine of the reciprocal dependence of the good and the wicked drives causes as refined immorality, distresses, and aversions in a still hale and hearty conscience. Still more, a doctrine of the derivation of all good impulses from wicked ones. Now he's going into like philosophy mode, just going on and on. If, however, a person should regard even the effects of hatred, envy, covetousness, and the lust to rule as conditions of life, as factors which fundamentally and essentially must be present in the general economy of life, and must therefore be further enhanced if life is to be further enhanced, he will suffer from such a view of things as from seasickness. And yet, even this hypothesis is far from being the strangest and most painful in this immense and almost new domain of dangerous insights, and there are in fact 100 good reasons why everyone should keep away from it who can. On the other hand, if one has once drifted there with one's bark, well, all right, let us clench our teeth, let us open our eyes and keep our hand firmly on the helm. We sail right over morality. We crush, we destroy perhaps the remains of our own morality by daring to make our voyage there. But what matter are we? Never yet did a profounder world of insight reveal itself to daring travelers and adventurers, and the psychologist who thus makes sacrifice. It is not the sacrificio del intelletto. On the contrary, will it at least be entitled to demand in return that psychology shall be recognized again as the queen of the sciences, for whose service and preparation the other sciences exist, for psychology is now again the path to fundamental problems. Well, that's kind of exciting, but I'm not entirely sure. Oh, is that it for the section? Okay, we finally got to the end of that section. Well, that only took 2 hours. It's kind of exciting. Okay, so this is why he's finally rounding up, because we've got all this stuff about the will and what it is to be willing, and how that now has to be reconsidered as a moral project, what it is to will, because it has to be doing with control of oneself, and that is the ethical question: how should one act? So what is it to will something? And then now we've got the development of the will. How do we deal with this would be a psychological thing, and any interpretive project we're going to undertake at this point would therefore be a question of how are we going to come and will ourselves or develop ourselves to do any of these things. And that is a psychological problem, how we can understand ourselves to go do those things. So, yeah. It's all the stuff that we could do, because everything gets unseated once we're starting to change our will and how we understand our interpretations of everything else. But now we have to deal with that somehow, and that's what makes us seasick if we're we're basically taking up the you're going through all your different sort of fundamentals in yourself and your economy of life. If you are essentially changing this or dealing with it, then you're gonna suffer from some things as from seasickness. It'll be just too much. You'll be you'll be unstable, constantly unstable. But once you do that, and anyone who try to do that, you should avoid that. And then, but anyone who gets out into this area where you're actually trying to rejigger your own will, then you might get somewhere new. I mean, that's a nice thought, but it's how does one psychologically do such things? And that's kind of where he's at right here. Okie doke. I think I'm going to stop reading Nietzsche now. This was kind of interesting. It was not what I expected, but I'm not so surprised either. This is sort of what Nietzsche is known for. So maybe this was not the right book to read, but so what? Go read Thus Spake Zarathustra or something. The lockdown